Have you ever been in a crowd of people where you just feel like you stick out like a sore thumb? Or maybe you've been at a baseball game and there's thousands of people in the stands and all of a sudden your video is on screen on the Jumbotron and you're pressured into doing something silly or doing a funny dance or something like that. Or maybe you were at a 3-year-old birthday party and you were the only teenager there and you feel like you're just sticking out and like you're just trying to keep your sanity. You know, about this time last year, I had the opportunity to go to the city of Manila, which is the capital city of the Philippines. And I was there for a youth conference where there was about 15,000 people from all over the world just gathering together, worshiping God and learning from God's word. And it was a really cool event because there was like different speakers from all over and there was different worship bands. And one of my favorite worship bands was Bethel Music from Bethel Church in California. And they led us in an awesome night of worship and it was great. But then the next morning when I went to go get breakfast at the hotel that I was staying at, I found out the band was staying at the hotel too and they were having breakfast too. So I just kind of saw them, ignored them, and I walked to the buffet line. Well, Brandon Lake, who's one of the lead singers of Bethel Music, he approached me and he goes, "Hey, weren't you at worship last night?" And I was like, "Really?" I was like, "Yeah, I was, but really? Like, how did you pick me out of the thousands of people?" And he goes, "Well, you and your buddy were sticking out like a sore thumb." And I was like, "Oh man!" And so I was like, got really self-conscious because like I thought I was like hiding amongst the people, which I really wasn't. Today, we're starting a new series called Stand, and we're living in this present day climate where things seems to be just getting harder. School's getting harder. Spending time with your family seems to be getting harder. Maybe even just simply going to get ice cream and forgetting your mask, and then you got to run back to your car and get your mask on just so you can have some ice cream. But then even that seems hard. But even there's other things, just like when you're just hanging out with your buddies and somebody flips out their cell phones and they're looking up inappropriate pictures and showing all your friends. Or maybe you're currently dating your boyfriend and he's wanting to do something that maybe you don't want to do. When we're pushed to our limit, we have a choice to make. We have a choice to either choose the least resistant path and to whatever is the easiest for you to go along, or are you going to choose to make a stand for God? In the next 4 weeks, we're going to be looking at a person named Daniel. We're going to look in the book of Daniel, and we're going to talk about 4 different points about how Daniel made a stand for God. The book of Daniel is actually an interesting book, and it's actually kind of divided into 2 different halves. And the first half is actually a narrative about Daniel and his 3 friends. And then the second half of the book is actually more about apocalyptic visions and kind of a warning to God's people about what's to come. But really what it does is it shows them, yes, we know that you're suffering. Yes, God's people, we know that you're struggling right now, but guess what? God is still in control, and that he is going to win one day. Let me set up the scene for you right now, what's going on in Daniel's life, all right? Daniel's living during a time where the Babylonians have now taken over Jerusalem and they've laid siege over it. King Nebuchadnezzar is now the one who's in charge, where God's chosen people have been ruling over this land for hundreds of years, but now it's turned over to the Babylonians. So we're going to pick up right here in Daniel chapter 1, verses 3 through 8. So listen with me. The king ordered Ashpenaz, the chief of staff, to bring to the palace some of the young men of Judah's royal family and other noble families who had been brought to Babylon as captives. Select only strong, healthy, and good-looking young men, he said. Make sure they are well versed in every branch of learning, are gifted with knowledge and good judgment, and are suited to serve in the royal palace. Train these young men in the language and the literature of Babylon. The king assigned them a daily ration of food and wine from his own kitchens. They were to be trained for 3 years, and they would enter the royal service. Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were 4 of the young men chosen, all from the tribe of Judah. The chief of staff renamed them with these Babylonian names. Daniel was called Belteshazzar. Hananiah was called Shadrach. Mishael was called Meshach. And Azariah was called Abednego. But Daniel was determined not to defile himself by eating the food and wine given to them by the king. He had asked the chief of staff for permission not to eat these unacceptable food. So King Nebuchadnezzar sought out these 4 young guys and plus other young guys from all over the land. And what he wanted to do was he wanted to take them to Babylon and obliterate and annihilate any kind of belief system that they had while they were at home. And he really wanted them to take over this Babylonian culture and the language and its foods and everything else. And they wanted them to become so dependent of the Babylonian culture that they would completely change where their allegiance would lie. Although it seemed that Daniel kind of caught on to their scheme because he looked at the food that was being presented to him, foods that were literally coming from the royal family's kitchen and presenting to them. But Daniel saw the food and actually it goes against his every belief. And so he says, no way, I'm not going to eat this. He chose to deny it. Why? Because it would interfere his relationship with him and God. So Daniel stood his ground and he asked the chief of staff, he goes, listen, I don't want to eat this food. Is it okay that I don't eat this food? Now, thankfully, the chief of staff found favor in Daniel because he was like, all right, I like this guy, but listen, I have to feed you something because if I don't feed you and then I present you to the king, then I don't want you to look wasted away. Well, Daniel eventually comes up with this great plan that we're going to look at in Daniel chapter 1, verses 12 through 14. Please test us for 10 days on a diet of vegetables and water, Daniel said. At the end of 10 days, see how we look compared to the other young men who are eating the king's food. Then make your decision in light of what you see. The attendant agreed to Daniel's suggestion and tested them for 10 days. Eventually, the chief of staff saw the benefits that was happening to Daniel and his gang. Like, they saw that Daniel was actually becoming more and more healthier and actually healthier than the rest of the young people that were there. And it looked so good to the chief of staff. Eventually, he took away all of the royal food and wine to everybody so that everybody had to eat vegetables. Now, personally, I would have been ticked off about that, but man, it was working well for Daniel. So not only were Daniel and his gang being healthy and looking good, but also they were learning a lot. They were learning the different literatures. They were learning the different language and the different cultures and stuff like that. And eventually when they were presented to the king found favor in them. So check out this in Daniel chapter 1, verses 19. The king talked with them, and no one impressed him as much as Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the royal service. Daniel and the boys got promoted. And even though they said no to the royal food and they didn't compromise their relationship with God and by eating food that they weren't allowed to eat, they still were able to move forward and be able to serve within the royal family. Essentially, these guys stood their ground and they were able to stand out from the rest of the guys, and the king took notice of them. See, they chose their relationship with God was more important than just having this ease of life. They could have easily just eaten the food and just moved on and maybe get promoted. But no, they chose to stand their ground, and they chose that their relationship with God was much more important. Typically, suffering can reveal ourselves a lot more. Suffering can reveal the functioning hope or trust that we have. We can clearly see how if we can easily just run to the wrong things in order to find security, to find hope, to find refuge for something. And a lot of times, man, we run to comfortable things. We run to comfortable things. Like for me, I run to food, and if it comforts me and it makes me feel good, then I'm gonna run to it. And sometimes a lot of it can be a bad thing. Sometimes, man, we can even run to toxic friends. Why? Because, man, we just think it's much easier just to be hanging out with toxic friends than to be able to find a whole new group of friends. Now, I've seen way too much how we run to alcohol or drugs just to numb the pain or the suffering that's going on in our lives. Or maybe you're involved in a conversation that is clearly toxic. Maybe you're involved in a conversation where they're clearly gossiping about somebody else, and you feel like that you shouldn't be having this conversation, or you shouldn't be part of this, and you either feel like you should say something, or you feel like you should take yourself out. And a lot of times, man, it's just easier if we just include ourselves in, we make that decision. So my question is, what are you doing that's apart from God, that's giving you a different sense of hope? What are you doing? Are you just blending into whatever everybody else is doing? Are you standing out? Are you standing out and doing what God has asked you to do? So what do you do when you're in situations like that? Like what Daniel was with your friends, or when you're being in a compromising situation, when your friends are looking at inappropriate videos and pictures on their phones? Or what do you do when people are gossiping about someone, or when you have an opportunity to be part of an illegal activity? Whatever it is, what are you doing? What do we do about that? Well, let's look at Ephesians chapter 6, verse 11. Put on all of God's armor so that you will be able to stand firm against all strategies of the devil. Satan and his goons are doing everything in their power to separate you from God. They don't want you to have a relationship with God. And so they're giving all their best stuff to you so that you wouldn't have that relationship. See, the passage in Ephesians tells us that we need to suit up. We need to suit up with God's armor. We need God's armor. We need God to help us to fight against the enemy's tactics. We need to fight him against our own train of thought, and be able to just say no or to say yes, and just stand for God. Because remember, God did not call you to blend in, but God called you to stand out. Make a choice to stand out. Make a choice to follow God. Make a goal so that when people see you, that they no longer see you, but they see Jesus Christ living out in you. So today, make a choice to stand out.
Cast my mind to Calvary, where Jesus bled and died for me. I see his wounds, his hands, his feet, my Savior on that cursed tree. His body bound and drenched in tears, they laid him down in Joseph's tomb, the entrance sealed by heavy stone. Messiah still and all alone. The blazing sun shall pierce the night, and I will rise among the saints, my gaze transfixed on Jesus' face.